This is Becoming Inclusive from the Kaleidoscope Group, where we're thinking differently about diversity, equity, and inclusion for more empowered people at work. We're committed to real change, and that begins with real conversations. Welcome in.
I'm Reggie Ponder, and welcome to another episode of Becoming Inclusive. I am so happy to have with me Mitch Brown, Senior Consultant of the Kaleidoscope Group with me. I have to tell you is that it's always great to talk with him. And so, Mitch, I just want to first say welcome, man.
Hey, good to be here, Reggie. You know, it's always a good time when we get together.
It really is. So I want to get right into this. We had our first discussion about why diversity is not enough with Chris Georges, the COO of the Kaleidoscope Group, and she talked about why diversity wasn't enough. Our second episode, we had an opportunity to talk to Margarita De Leon, the Vice President of Client Services, and she talked about why inclusion is not enough. Now I get to talk to you about why equity is not enough. And before we talk about why it's not enough, let's get a little bit into what equity really is. And I always like your perspective on this. How would you say to people what equity looks like?
In summation, it's efforts that an organization or a person takes to create fairness and opportunities for others where inequity exists.
Wow. So, you came all academic on me and everything. So break that down to me. How would that look in an organization? Give me an example of that.
Yeah, no problem. So a lot of times organizations or clients that I work with, right, they want to be more equitable. That's something we're hearing a lot of nowadays. And in their efforts to be more equitable, they have to look throughout their organization and enterprise and look at ways that they are inequitable. And a lot of times I tell people, well, how do you tell something like that? Well, you can go and look at your outcomes. You can look at data, look at certain trends. And if there is an equitable representation across the diversity of your organization, that's something you may want to look into, right? If you go and think about, things like in terms of benefits and, oftentimes what a lot of people are doing a lot of now, pay equity, right? And compensation. You can definitely think about the distribution of your stakeholders in your organization and what that means in terms of identity by some of the diversity demographics that, people like to, know something about, my racial makeup, my gender makeup, generational makeup, other means of thinking about, how do you go about seeing and identifying what populations among your stakeholders may be experiencing some skewed outcome or inequity, right, that they're dealing with. And most notably, really just specifically, really quick, Reggie, to answer your question. So if I have an issue with, hiring and representation, equity play might be going and looking at my hiring practices, saying that, are we sourcing, right, in a very fair and representative way would be one example.
I love that. When I think about equity, I always think about the famous picture where you have these three kids standing on a box that's the same. And the smaller kid is standing on the same box that the taller kid is standing on, but can't see over the fence. The middle kid barely can see over the fence, but the taller kid really didn't need the box and it's like really has a wonderful view. Talk about that as a illustration.
Yeah, that illustration you're talking about, I hope a lot of people out there probably get a visual of that. But it's the idea around that, when I talk about understanding inequities, that you have to understand that people in the world that they live in the way that they exist, it's not set up for me just like it is set up for everybody else, right? People are experiencing different realities. And one of the things that an equity play does is looks to take in consideration, right, those different realities and seeing how we can address maybe some of those variances or discrepancies or some of just things that, again, no one's fault, right? Necessarily. Sometimes they may be someone's direct fault. But what are we doing as an organization, right, to help, right? So a lot of times If you think about that picture, right, what they're trying to do, Reggie, is basically the desired outcome is to be able to view the game, right? And one person is already tall enough to do that as is. Another person is just tall enough that if they stand on the box, they can get it. Another person, as you explained, if they stand on 2 boxes, they can get it. So the boxes are what? That equity play that allows them to do what? View the game, just like the person who doesn't need a box can. And did the people who are shorter than the tallest individual, did they do anything to be short? No, it's just what it is, right? It's part of their circumstance. So that's what that illustration is about. That's a little bit about, how what equity is.
So we can understand that in the sense of being tall and short, but it becomes a little murky for people when we start talking about things like a gender. So how do I have to give a different box or 2 boxes for someone from a gender perspective? Can you bring that into focus for us?
Yeah, it's tons of stuff out there. If you want to go Google, you're going to get several hits when it comes to gender and something like pay equity. Probably like one of the most notable topics in the equity space when it comes to gender dynamics. And for years, across many different industries and many different companies, people have been doing some of the similar work or same work or in the same roles, functions, titles even, right? And there's a huge discrepancy between what they take home, right, and their male counterparts. So therein lies one of the, and again, it's not an easy issue to deal with. I don't want to speak to it in that way.
Hold up, Mitch. See, you say it's not an easy issue, so I want to push back on that. For me, the issue of pay equity is an easy issue. There are no winners or losers here. Is that you're making your fee. All we're saying is that somebody who does the same amount of work, has the same title, gets paid equally. I don't understand why that's not solved. I don't understand what is difficult about that, because that is clear cut. Help me.
The concept definitely not, it's very easy and something that's easily agreeable with also to me, if you're in the inclusion space, which that's something I want, something I need. The barrier is that most organizations and companies have their roles and responsibilities and duties and pay bands set up in such comprehensive and complicated ways. It's hard to sometimes make an argument about what's an orange to an orange. So that is where you a lot of times may see pushback. A lot of times you may see, I would say something that doesn't allow the pace of a pay equity program to really fulfill itself in some kind of, probably what's acceptable to most people, in terms of the pace at which something like that gets completed, implemented, and real change is felt. It's because of those kind of things. So that's what I mean when I say it's not easy, because you're working and navigating through those things. But the idea, right? When we talk about pay equity, equal pay for, let's take one from the United States women's soccer national team, equal pay for equal play. Those things are something that everybody can rally behind and get behind. I mean, I hope, that right there is a quintessential example of why equity is needed and why it's important.
One other thing about equity is that it seems to me that equity is about recognizing that there are barriers or recognizing that there might be privilege in some different areas. And privilege is a whole different discussion, but I don't think we can have the equity discussion without at least touching on privilege a bit. And I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
I think so. I think you're right about that. I think we talk about privilege as the existence of and the absence of barriers and the existence of unearned positive advantages. And what we simply mean by that is that the existence and way my life is set up, right? Again, I mentioned this before, isn't necessarily set up for everybody else like that. And privilege isn't something that necessarily has to mean what you think it means, right? Sometimes we otherize the concept as if like, hey, we're not rich, famous, that kind of thing. Surely we're not privileged. Well, that's not the case. You can be privileged in many different ways, especially, right, when you mentioned something, Reggie, within the context of an organizational culture. There may be authority, power. There may be certain organizational cultural dynamics based upon my personality, who I am, that I'm privileged within that construct, right? So why is it an important concept to know something about, at least when it comes to who you are as a person? A lot of our content, we work through identifying self-privilege, because that's our philosophy. You understand where you are. Why? I'm best situated to create fairness and equity for others based upon, again, my position of power, privilege, so on. So there's that connection, right? Fairness, opportunity, creating that for others. And if I give you an anecdotal example here, let's take like women's suffrage or the right to vote, right? And if you look back along like that piece of history and you think about, well, who is in Congress or in legislation, right, with the ability to give women the right to vote? Well, it wasn't any women in Congress or the legislation, right? So it took men who were in a position of privilege and power to create fairness and opportunities for others by passing that legislation and doing the such. So much like that in an anecdotal example, right? That's more of a grand kind of historical reference. But that's where the opportunity lies, I think, with a lot of what we can do and how we show up every day in terms of understanding what part we can play.
See, this is why I like talking to you, because I love that. I think that that's a great antidote. So now we got equity. And the title of this episode is Why Equity is Not Enough. So we've defined it. We've kind of gotten into it. So I want to ask you, why is equity not enough?
It was a tricky question. And preparing for this podcast, Reggie, I had to tell you, I thought that it was a trick question because I thought equity was enough. I thought equity was the one of the most, I think priority things or primary things that one should be worried about in our business. But then I thought more deeply about it. And I said, you know what? It's not enough because it's not enough in its isolation. It needs things to complement it. So you've already talked to Chris Georges about, diversity. You've talked to Margarita, who is my work auntie. Hey, Margarita, about inclusion. And I think, what's next, and, and not to give any kind of, a preview for the audience, but we may talk a little bit about this idea of unity. And unity is about this idea that it's not going to be some of us, but it's going to take us all. And when it takes us all, right, equity is one of those things where if you're creating fairness and opportunities for others, by definition, sometimes you're doing things that are going against the grain, or you're going against, maybe the status quo, if you will. You're doing things differently in a way. And some people, right, or some entities will resist that or will feel some type of way about the change. So the unity piece is something that makes that full circle, right? It helps people understand that equity is not about necessarily leaving others out, right? But really calling people in. I've heard people talk about that and say that before. And I think the unity play is that big piece, right? So that's why, to me, equity is not enough. You need these other components of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and, the kaleidoscope group philosophy around unity. You need those plays.
It's really interesting because I am of the same mind of you. I'm saying to myself, if we can get to equity, I'm going to be pretty darn happy but I really do understand when you talk about that you need that diversity and you need that inclusion. I believe, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Mitch. I believe that when the industry of diversity began, so to speak, that it was all about equity, but that was the foundation of what diversity was talking about. It wasn't just talking about, hey, let's just put a couple of people in a spot. That it was like the equity was undergirded that, if you will. And I'd love to get your thoughts to that.
I think historically, when you look at American history, inclusion has much been a story and a narrative built around first, I think, gender. And then it moved in the civil rights movement to be much about race. And subsequently, maybe more about, LGBTQ plus rights and so on and so on. So I think what you've had and what you've seen is that because of the inequitable circumstances, in some cases are so egregious that what we've had to do is, like my example earlier, is legislate inclusion, right? And that is a lot of times how equity plays come to pass. So in many ways, I agree with you, Reggie. Somebody looks at something like affirmative action, right? That's not a new concept, right? It's a very older concept, and actually one that, I think is misinterpreted and misconstrued, that people think that affirmative action was just about, people of color, when it's really just about underrepresented entities within the workplace, which at the time was not only really about people of color, but also a lot about women and things like that as well. Subsequently, things like Title IX came along and those kind of things. So I think that, because circumstances were so egregious, we had to start with equity, and we kind of, again, ramped up the diversity amongst pretty much, the corporate workplace, the educational, academia workplace, So we have to value and leverage differences because you know what, we just got we got an organization or we got a school that just looks totally different than it did traditionally. And inclusion and diversity became more of a I guess a forward thinking kind of thing rather than equity, because in some ways, right, equity equity doesn't necessarily have to be something that's perpetual, so to speak, right? Good equity plays maybe address the situation and allow you to create that fairness and opportunities for others. And once you have it, right, what do you do from there? So I think, again, your comment around, hey, that seems like where we started, right? And I think it's still need for that as we go along, because some issues that we've had never get addressed, or they never get resolved in a way that's satisfactory, and maybe in some ways to some individuals. But that's a good point to kind of point out, and just a couple of thoughts around that.
Here's a question for you, Mitch. Do you believe that you can have equity without diversity and inclusion?
I think you can. I would just coming off the top of my head, I don't know if you would be very successful, or you would have, what I would call operational excellence, because a lot of times equity without great support and communication, again, in terms of the receptivity of how people think about what's happening is unique. Here's the example I'll give. Let's stick with the example we've been using prior, about representation, right? And if an organization says, you know what, my organization isn't particularly diverse, and that's problematic because of the marketplace that we serve, the communities in which we operate, we want to be more representative of both the people we sell sprockets to and the places where we build our manufacturing plants to make these sprockets. So yes, we want to make an effort to do something about that. So, okay, that's on the table, right? So your equity play might be, you know what, we're going to go and make sure we have, what they call in the NFL, the Rooney Rule. So that's really just a diverse slate of candidates, right? So if we don't have 2 or 3 diverse candidates, we won't move on a job. What might we do? We might make sure that we diversify our interviewing panels, right? We might make sure we look at our discussion guides and make sure that there's no culturally biased wording, terminologies, those things like that. So you do all these things, right? And then you get the new hires, and guess what? By golly, you start to get some more diverse representation. So that was a whole description of an equity play. Now, to your question, if you don't have inclusion as a part of that, and inclusion is more about as a people leader or a people manager or somebody who's in talent acquisition, how do you support that hire, right? Because you just can't leave it at, hey, we did the equity play and the other person's here. Because now you have to deal with this idea of what some people might have a preconceived notion. Oh, this person was just hired because what? They're different, right? And then if you do that, you may sabotage that person's experience. You do that, then when we talk about unity, you already create another wedge, which doesn't allow for the camaraderie, the team collaboration. So inclusion in this example of a good inclusive behavioral skill from a people leader is supporting around communicating around the hire. Hey, this person met all the qualifications and needs that we have for this job, but this person also adds something to our team, right, that we haven't had. And that's why this person is of value. So that's a very much conversation than saying, oh, I hired Mitch Brown because we got this diversity thing going on. And yeah, we're super equitable, right? But we're probably not a happy place to work.
Well, Mitch, I'd love to sit here and talk with you forever and try to have you on, but I don't want to leave without if there's an additional point that you might want to make as to why equity is not enough.
Yeah, again, I just think, equity is one of those things that's very important, right? But as the example I just gave you, equity has to be supported and complemented by efforts around inclusive behavioral skills. And that's in how you communicate with others, how you lead others, and really how you give people cultural competence skills to, really just have what I call operational excellence. And, again, equity could definitely give you the results you want, but you can't think about them in a vacuum. You got to consistently be thinking about you are, curating a culture that has significant biodiversity. And you got to always kind of, know that and understand that all of your stakeholders have different emotions, different feelings, different things. And if you're leading an organization or you're a leader or you're out there and you're leading this work, it's important that you, obviously you can't be everything to everybody, but you need to be all things as much as you can, right, in terms of unifying all of those different stakeholders and stuff like that. So that's why it's not enough, because again, what we're looking to accomplish here is unity and true inclusion.
Mitch, again, thank you as usual. We're absolutely going to have you on again. You brought up a couple of issues that I know we'll need to talk about, be it with you or even some of your colleagues. This whole issue about unity that you previewed that for us, man. So that's one that we really do need to talk about, and then and delve a little bit deeper, I think, into that whole privilege discussion, because we basically only scratched the surface here. I'm Reggie Ponder, and this is Becoming Inclusive, and that is Mitch Brown. Thanks again, Mitch.
Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Becoming Inclusive is presented by the Kaleidoscope Group, your full-service diversity, equity, and inclusion partner serving clients worldwide. Learn more and continue the conversation at kgdiversity.com.